What if your body froze solid, stiff as a board, and yet you survived? This isn't the plot of a sci-fi movie. This is the true story of Jean Hilliard, a 19-year-old who defied death on a freezing winter night in 1980. Grab a warm drink and settle in, because this story is nothing short of miraculous. It was the early hours of December 20th, 1980 in Lengby, Minnesota, a town so small that everyone knew everyone else. It's the kind of place where winters are relentless, and survival in such conditions demands preparation and respect for the elements. The night was brutally cold, with temperatures plunging well below zero, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. Jean Hilliard, a spirited and determined 19-year-old, was driving home after visiting a friend. Like many small-town residents, Jean was used to the dangers of icy roads. But that night, she was driving a rear-wheel drive car, a model notoriously difficult to handle on slick, snowy terrain. As Jean made her way through the darkness, the car began to skid. The tires couldn't grip the icy road, and in seconds, her vehicle slid into a ditch. Stranded and alone, Jean was left with a decision. Imagine her situation. No cell phone to call for help, no heated blankets to keep warm. Just the deafening silence of the snow-covered countryside and a vehicle quickly losing its heat. What would you have done in her place? Jean decided to walk for help. She believed a friend's house was nearby. Only a short walk, she thought. Bundled in a light winter coat, mittens, and cowboy boots, she braced herself against the bitter wind and began trudging through the snow. But the Minnesota winter is unforgiving. Snow blanketed the landscape, obscuring landmarks and making every hill look the same. The cold gnawed at her exposed skin, and with each step her strength began to fade. Hours later, she spotted a house in the distance. Relief surged through her. Finally, she thought she'd made it. She pushed herself forward with the last of her energy. But as she approached the front door, her body gave out. Jean collapsed just feet away from safety, lying face down in the snow. She would remain there, frozen, for 6 hours. The next morning, rancher Wally Nelson stepped outside to a world painted in white. For Wally, it was an ordinary winter morning. The snow-covered fields sparkled under the pale light, and the holiday season added a certain magic to the air. But as he looked out across his yard, he saw something that didn't belong. A dark shape lying in the snow. At first, he thought it might be a pile of clothing or a misplaced object. But as he got closer, his heart raced. It was a person. Wally ran to Jean's side. Her body was frozen stiff, her hair crackled with frost, and her eyes stared blankly into the distance. Her skin was icy to the touch, and her limbs were as rigid as wood. To Wally, she looked gone. But then, he noticed something remarkable. She was still breathing. Panicking, Wally tried to move Jean, but her body wouldn't bend. It was like trying to lift a statue. He quickly fetched a larger vehicle, loaded her carefully, and rushed her to the hospital. When they arrived, the doctors were stunned. Jean's body temperature was so low it didn't even register on a thermometer. Her skin was too hard to pierce with a needle. She looked, for all intents and purposes, frozen to death. Let's pause here to understand what Jean was up against. In freezing temperatures, the human body enters survival mode. Blood flow is redirected to the vital organs, the heart, brain, and lungs, to keep them functioning. Meanwhile, the extremities, like fingers and toes, are left to fend for themselves, which is why frostbite strikes these areas first. If the cold persists, the water inside our cells begins to freeze. As it turns to ice, it expands, forming sharp crystals that tear apart the cell membranes. This process leads to irreparable damage. For most people, prolonged exposure to extreme cold is fatal. So, how did Jean survive? Her case defies logic. But scientists have a few theories. Some believe her body entered a state of suspended animation, similar to a process seen in certain animals known as cryptobiosis. Take tree frogs, for example. These tiny creatures survive being frozen solid in the winter by producing a sugar-based antifreeze that protects their cells from ice damage. Then there's the Siberian worm, a microscopic organism that can survive tens of thousands of years encased in ice, only to thaw and come back to life as if nothing happened. Could humans have a similar capability hidden within us? Back in the hospital, doctors began the slow process of warming Jean's body. They wrapped her in heating pads, hoping to see even the faintest sign of life. Hours passed, and her family waited in agony. And then, something incredible happened. Jean's body began to thaw. Warm blood flowed through her veins, her skin softened, and life returned to her frozen limbs. By noon that day, she opened her eyes. Against all odds, Jean Hilliard was alive and talking. Her first concern? Her dad's car, still stuck in the ditch. Amazingly, Jean recovered fully. No frostbite, no permanent nerve damage, nothing. Her survival stunned doctors and scientists alike. News of her miraculous recovery spread quickly, and Jean became a national sensation. Newspapers called her story a miracle, and researchers from around the world wanted to study her case. How had her body avoided the catastrophic damage caused by freezing? What could her experience teach us about the limits of human survival? Jean's story opens the door to fascinating possibilities. Imagine if we could harness the ability to survive freezing temperatures. Soldiers in Arctic climates, astronauts on long space missions, or even stranded hikers could be saved by tapping into this hidden potential. Today, Jean lives a quiet life far from the spotlight. She doesn't dwell on that fateful night, but understands the profound impact her story has had on others. Her survival is more than just a medical anomaly. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the mysteries of our biology. Her story reminds us that even in the coldest, darkest moments, there is hope. So, what do you think? Was Jean's survival a scientific puzzle waiting to be solved, or was it something beyond explanation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. And remember, when the odds seem impossible, the human spirit has a way of thawing through anything.